Thank you so much, Ambassador Bolton. I really appreciate you being here with us. American and Brazilian officials are saying that this is a new beginning for the relationship between Brazil and the U.S. What is the White House priority during this meeting, and what would be a successful meeting?
Well, the president's very excited to welcome President Bolsonaro to the United States on his first visit as Brazil's new president. I think both sides think there are real opportunities to strengthen the relationship between the two countries in the political sphere, economics, military. There are just a whole range of areas where we can cooperate. And certainly, I think while we're looking at the big picture of the relationship, we can't ignore the terrible plight of the people of Venezuela, the economic catastrophe that's been visited on them by the Maduro regime, and what we can do to try and effect a peaceful transfer of power to interim President Juan Guaido. But there will be many issues. This is a very full agenda for next week.
Can we expect an agreement, an announcement? The Brazilian officials are saying that there might be a deal on the Alcântara base.
Well, I think there are a whole range of issues we're still looking. We call them deliverables from a summit like this. So there are a lot of possibilities, but before the two leaders get together, it would not be for me to reveal what they're about to agree to. But we're very optimistic we're going to accomplish a lot, make a lot of progress here.
Is the United States planning to grant Brazil the designation of a major non-NATO ally?
Well, this is certainly one of the issues that we're considering. We think there are numerous opportunities for cooperation. We want to show the strength of our relationship, our support for President Bolsonaro, so we're looking at a lot of these things.
Ambassador, Brazil is against military intervention in Venezuela, and it does not impose sanctions unless it comes from the UN Security Council. What kind of cooperation does President Trump want with Brazil to deal with the crisis in Venezuela, and does President Trump think Brazil can do more?
Well, obviously Brazil has borne a substantial burden for some time now because of the refugee flows out of Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil being the countries in the hemisphere that have the two largest populations of refugees. So we think Brazil did an outstanding job a few weeks ago in the effort to deliver humanitarian assistance into the country. It's really outrageous that the Maduro regime tried to block that. We'd like to find ways to alleviate the suffering of the Venezuelan people. We think the best way to do that would be to transfer power to Juan Guaido. Let's get on with the business of finding a democratic government for the country and taking advantage of Venezuela's extraordinary natural resources. In all these areas, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, the leading countries of this hemisphere can do a lot of work together.
Can you expect President Trump to actually ask President Bolsonaro to do more on Venezuela during this meeting?
I think we're all looking for ways to do more. The United States certainly has put a lot of pressure on the Maduro regime. We're trying to cut off their ability to loot the reserves that Venezuela has and transfer these resources out of the country. And I think demonstrating to the people of the world that the hemisphere really is united in support of Guaido on the political side as well as the economic side. There's a lot that we can all do.
Ambassador, Bolsonaro is planning to announce during his visit here a visa waiver for Americans. Can we expect the same sort of move from the American government?
Well, we're certainly looking at that as well. This is there are so many ways that we can improve the relationship. Although we've tried to stay close to Brazil over the years, it's been difficult in prior administrations. So there are many steps we can take. And President Bolsonaro brings a real energy to the relationship. He's determined to make progress. He's very eager and very active, and we want to try and be as responsive as we can.
I want to get back to that to get your perspective because you met him in Rio. But first, I want to go to talk about China and the role of China in the region, because China is the biggest trade partner of Brazil. Does the United States want to change that?
Well, I think the United States is probably the biggest investor in Brazil, and so far we'd like to keep it that way. We have a great trade relationship, but it could expand, and I think this is one of the things the two leaders will focus on. There are a lot of opportunities there. We have two huge economies. I'm familiar myself, obviously, with Brazil's petroleum assets from my own days before coming into the government. So we're very optimistic that we can overcome some obstacles in the past, and I'm sure that the economic relationship will be one of the key issues the two presidents talk about.
Ambassador, President Trump criticized Brazil of being one of the toughest country for trade, access, and business. Does he expect things will change now with the new government? And another question, is there any interest from the American government to have or to discuss, start conversation about a free trade agreement with Brazil?
Well, again, I think these are all issues that we should be talking about. I think under prior administrations there was kind of gridlock. There wasn't a lot of progress. I think Brazil obviously has to look out for its own interests in these trade talks. The president doesn't expect anything else. But with the kinds of economies we both have and our desire to strengthen ties within the hemisphere, there are a lot of possibilities. So bilateral agreements of that kind, or just ways we can take steps in the interim to increase bilateral trade, would all be to the good.
One more question. President Trump is ready to support Brazil's ongoing effort to join the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Will this be discussed also?
Oh, no, I'm sure it will be. We've certainly looked at that. We've been able to do that for Argentina. There's no reason it shouldn't happen for Brazil as well. But all these things, it turns out things are bureaucratically a lot more complicated than people on the outside of government realize. But I think in both President Trump and President Bolsonaro, you have two individuals who want to make progress. They're going to give clear orders to their governments, and we're very hopeful.
Would also the White House like to see Brazil playing a bigger role on the world stage alongside with the U.S.?
I think it's absolutely appropriate for Brazil to play a larger role. I think President Bolsonaro has that in mind. I think his main focus at the moment, as I understand it, in Brazil is on pressing domestic policy needs. He campaigned on some of these issues. He obviously has to focus on them, and I think the people of Brazil expect that. But we're ready for discussions with Brazil. We're really very excited about the possibility of being able to partner on a number of issues internationally, and I think the two presidents will be talking about that when they meet.
Do you think would the White House consider supporting Brazil's historic, I'm sure you know that ambition to secure a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council?
Well, this is an issue that's been discussed for a long time. I discussed it when I was U.S. ambassador to the UN. There are a lot of people that want to become permanent members, and you have to keep in mind the effectiveness of the Security Council too. If you make it as big as the General Assembly, it will be as effective as the General Assembly, and we want to guard against that. But if there is an expansion, certainly Brazil has a very legitimate claim to be one of the countries that are involved in that.
Ambassador, what do you think about the comparison between President Bolsonaro and President Donald Trump? They call President Bolsonaro the Trump of the tropics. And do you think Bolsonaro and President Trump are like-minded?
Well, I think up here maybe we'll call President Trump the Bolsonaro of North America. I was very impressed when I met then President-elect Bolsonaro in Rio right before the G20 summit in Argentina. He's obviously got the characteristics of a real leader. He's very ambitious for his country. I think he's plain-spoken. He says what's on his mind. And in America, plain speaking has always been a virtue. So I think the two of them will get along very well. And I think they've got a lot in common to talk about. So it's one reason why we think the personal relationship that we expect the two of them to have will spill over into the broader bilateral relationship. It's one reason President Trump is so excited to welcome President Bolsonaro here in Washington.
Do you think you can hear any kind of announcement that President Trump will visit Brazil anytime soon? Would you like to go back to Brazil?
Well, I'd love to go back to Brazil, so if the president decides to go down there, I could go down and help advance the trip and that sort of thing. I think it's very important for these two big countries, the two biggest in the Western Hemisphere, to have closer ties. It's been, in a way, strange that we haven't been able to make more progress over the years. I think this is a real opportunity. I think both countries should seize on it. I think both leaders are determined to try and do that.
Ambassador, 2 more questions. Do I have time? One more. Okay. One more on Brazil and then one on the. Yes?
Go ahead. Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you. On Brazil, my last question is I hear some officials, American officials, in my conversations here, that they are cautiously optimistic. Do you agree with that?
Well, I'm more than cautiously optimistic. I really think we stand on the verge of real progress to expand and deepen the bilateral relationship. I think that will have consequences both in our hemisphere and around the world. So when this opportunity comes up, you need to take advantage of it. I think you've got 2 very decisive leaders here. I'm not saying a lot necessarily going to happen in the first meeting, but I think they'll chart a course where you're going to see substantial change and real improvement in the way our 2 countries talk to each other.
Okay, and my last question for you, Ambassador, it's about a reaction of what happened in New Zealand. Is this a terror attack? What is your reaction to that?
Well, it's obviously a great tragedy. It certainly looks like a terror attack, a hate crime. Our current information is we have 49 dead. That number could rise. It's still uncertain that all of the attackers have been captured. We've been in touch with our embassy in New Zealand, and I expect we'll have more information as time passes. But it's a great tragedy. There's no doubt about it.
All right, Ambassador, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For the interview.